Welcome, everyone. All right, I'm Daniel Bordman from the National Telegraph, and with me today is Samuel Greenfield, the candidate in Thornhill for the People's Party of Canada, the PPC. Sam has joined us, and I want to thank Samuel for joining us live because not a lot of politicians have the stones to go on live with someone who isn't a member. I've not been vetted by the PPC to make sure that I don't ask this or that or whatever. And you've also agreed to answer questions from the audience. So that is another thing that I never thought I'd see happen. Keep in mind, so if you ask any question and they're something I deem not insane, I'll bring them up. So if your question's not getting asked, that's not the PPC. That's me saying, hey, no, like, okay, we're not going there. So if it's related to Canada, the PPC, relevant. If it's your personal conspiracy about how the lizard people are okay, I'm not going to put them in that situation. But I'll start off the conversation. We'll get into some PPC positions. We'll get into some maybe specific Thornhill issues, and then we'll see where things go from there. So as this is a very important day, we're a week left, something huge has broken today, and I need to get your answer on this because we have learned that Erin O'Toole uses they, them pronouns. So, Samuel, why does Maxime Bernier not have his pronouns in his Twitter bio? What are his pronouns? What are your pronouns? And how do you plan on winning an election or getting even a vote without telling everyone your pronouns right away?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Thanks for having me on the show, Daniel. Look, I don't. Everyone knows what my pronouns are. Okay, I don't need to say anything else. I'm a man. Okay, so you know what they are. And I don't need to state the obvious because to go and state the obvious is it's a good example of how we are in denial of fundamental reality, and worse than that, we're pandering to people who do not believe in fundamental reality. And the reality is that, with rare exceptions of people who are born with different genitalia at birth, you have a biological sex. That is a fact of life. And if you think otherwise, then you're in denial of reality. And that's just how it is. So look, Maxime Bernier doesn't care what your pronouns are, so long as you are united with other Canadians in the values that we all ought to share, which, those are the freedom, fairness, respect, and personal responsibility. So, hey, if you want to have other pronouns, that's your call. But don't enforce your, unreality on me or Maxime Bernier or anyone else for that matter.
All right. Yes, that's a good place to start. And yes, I was being a bit tongue-in-cheek setting you that one. So I guess this is an interesting place to sort of somewhat half pivot. The culture, and this is something that I think, and when I talked to Maxime Bernier, that the PPC has made a bit of an issue is they will get into the culture war in a way the Conservative Party is unwilling to do. I pointed out that I'm not sure how much you know about Bill C6. That is sort of what they're billing as the conversion therapy bill. Bernier, I believe, is the only one against it. And my big problem there is, well, we all think of conversion therapy as, there's a man who's gay, which no one reasonable has a problem with, and conversion therapy is electroshock therapy to make someone not gay anymore. And we all
in the church basement, right?
In the church basement, while wearing a white hood. Yes, it's he's holding a Bible, he's whacking you with a Bible, and doing it. And that's what we think of conversion therapy. However, what has been labeled conversion therapy by Bill C6 is you have a 10-year-old child, let's say he's a boy, and that boy comes home from school and says, "Daddy, I'm a girl." And if you don't give him affirmation therapy, so if you don't take him to a therapist to just totally affirm right away, if you say, well, we should maybe seek counseling, right? Send him to a therapist to maybe talk about this. Is this gender dysphoria? Is he really a girl? That's also considered conversion therapy under Canadian law, under Bill C6. And this is a bill that the Conservative Party will not fight. I know Derek Sloan was one of the few people vocal, and then he got tossed out. So I believe the PPC is the only party that has voiced any opposition to this. Am I correct on that?
Yeah, the only nationwide federal party. So look, the issue here is, like, as you mentioned, there's kind of a bait and switch, if you will, right? So the bait is this putting forward this narrative that isn't true, that people are being physically abused because of they're expressing homosexual sentiments or whatever, and then they're being electroshocked in the church basement. That's not the case. Okay, this is just to do with counseling. And look, if you have kids, those are your children, and you are free to raise those children in your tradition, in your faith, and you have the best interests of your kids in mind because they're your kids. And so I think what this speaks to is this wishy-washiness that the conservatives have. That's why I call them, they are not willing to stand up to any of the more radical elements that the left is pushing because they're actually just too afraid of losing left-wing votes. And that's the difference between us and the CPC, is that we're not afraid of that. What matters most to us is the truth and making sure that our fundamental rights and freedoms are respected. And this is an assault on the religious freedom of Canadians.
Yeah, I think that's, and I would go more. I mean, yeah, it's religious freedom is a lot, and I think there's a lot of non-religious people. I mean, I know friends who from a very reasonable atheistic point of view just say, that's my 8-year-old son is a boy, and I don't want to, I mean, you don't need to be a Jew, Christian, Muslim, Hindu to oppose to hormone blockers on people on puberty. I mean, the reason why you have so much of why this is an issue in the first place is because there are very people with a very hard left agenda who are pushing this, who are advancing this agenda in school and in the culture at large. And that leads to a lot of children starting to question their own sexuality, their own gender in this way. And I think it's tantamount to child abuse to go and feed this narrative to kids and then try and encourage them to change their biological reality with pharmaceutical products. That's the fact that we have to somehow come out and say that this is that this is bad is insane, that we're at this point in our society. Yeah, so I think into that, and I just put up people are asking if the Facebook chat is working. The Facebook chat seems to be working for most people. So if you're on my page or the National Telegraph page on the direct video, the comments should be coming to me if you're asking questions. So we'll go on that. All right, I think that's a pretty solid answer on if I could sort of repeat your position. Actually, the PPC's position is parental autonomy on sort of gender issues. You will not interfere on the decisions that parents make.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, once you're 18, you're of the age of majority. You're autonomous from your parents, so you can do whatever you want in a free society. That doesn't make it right, but that's your choice. That's part of living in a free and open society. But you may not, in a free society, infringe on the rights of parents. That is totally unacceptable, and the PPC opposes that categorically.
All right, excellent. Okay, so here let's get into sort of one of the roadblocks that I come up with for the PPC when the PPC is a new party. You're not going to get lots of coverage on CTV for obvious reasons, and we won't over litigate those reasons. I mean, I think the National Telegraph, my audience, has heard me ramble on about them enough. And one of the things I come up with when I, talk maybe in the Jewish community of like, yeah, okay, I'm voting PPC this time. You just get reflexively the PPC, but they're anti-Semitic. It's one of the things you have to deal with. And you being the Thornhill candidate, which if there's people in Alberta, that is one of the more heavily populated Jewish ridings. Despite Samuel Greenfield's name, Greenfield, you are not actually of the tribe, but you are running in Thornhill. So,
and I'm always honored that people think I'm Jewish.
Yeah,
but I don't misrepresent myself. But I am honored.
That's good, and I do the same thing of not overrepresent people trying to tell me like, oh, do the Ben Shapiro thing, wear the kippah, do that. I'm like, I don't overplay my level of religiosity.
Hey, you know what? I was telling I think it was my wife or my brother today that you're like the Canadian Ben Shapiro. Yeah,
I've got that, and I take it as a compliment. Fast talking Jews with conservative bent. It's the comparison is inevitable and
we need more of that. We need more of that, Dave.
So, okay, you come up with but the PPC is anti-Semitic. What does account to this? So let's start with the obvious. the Jewish community will care about, what is your position on Israel? Like, red meat one, like, will you move the embassy to Jerusalem?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, that's where it belongs.
Yeah,
that is the historic capital of Jerusalem, and that goes back thousands of years. So if you want to be historically accurate, you move the embassy to Jerusalem. It's very simple.
Yeah, I think that's a good answer, and
where was the temple? I mean, where did King David and King Solomon? Where did they have their seat of power? It wasn't in Tel Aviv, right?
It was in Jerusalem. I mean, Tel Aviv was basically created out of sand in 1909. Okay, so and on that, now one of the misnomers that I think people have, misconceptions of Canadian politics, a lot of people have, is a lot of people think we're funding Israel. America gives aid to Israel, and the military aid from America is a different type of aid, and we're not going to. That's American politics. We won't get into that. Canada actually does not give aid to Israel, so I won't make you answer questions on will you defund it. So, I mean, when you say the PPC will not give foreign aid to Israel, we currently don't, and I think that's a good idea. But we do give fund a lot of very questionable UN groups and in the Palestine, like UNRWA. So Justin Trudeau has given hundreds of millions of dollars to UNRWA. Is there a PPC platform on funding of United Nations, Palestinian-related NGOs there?
So what's really interesting is if you go on the PPC policy, like on their platform online on the website, and you look up what we have to say on foreign policy, we actually acknowledge that there is this total hypocrisy that some of the worst violators of human rights in the world then sit on the UN Human Rights Council. So look, the UN is another one of these.
Can I just add? Every country with currently active slave markets sits on the UN Human Rights Council. So if you want to get a seat on the UN Human Rights Council, start selling people.
So that's all you need to know, right? The UN is a globalist organization, and quite frankly, I mean, as extreme as this sounds, we should have as little to do with the UN as possible. And any funding that we are currently sending to the UN, and I mean, the whole idea of the PPC is to have this kind of interventionary stance. So it doesn't mean that we don't stand with our allies abroad, but what it means is we're going to be very judicious in how we do so, and we're not going to be splashing cash all over. Because look, a lot. You know how it is. You go to other countries. There's a lot of corruption. You funnel money into those countries. The money ends up in the pockets of some kind of local, corrupt official or despot who just continues to oppress his people, right? So this model of just throwing money at countries is the same as just what we do with every problem here at home too. We throw money at it. We hope it goes away. It never does. And then we just keep doing the same thing over and over again. So yeah, it's got to stop. And the PPC is really the only party that is willing to stand up against that kind of waste and, just the promotion of useless foreign policy.
Okay. So I think that's a good answer. Now, here's a bit of a tougher question, and it goes on this, and it's from Wyatt. And this is Wyatt and I are a bit more hawkish on foreign policy than a lot of the current conservative base. And I think this is legitimate. So what does Sam think, / the PPC, about giving foreign aid to countries that are actual allies, like Taiwan, Republic of China, Georgia, and Ukraine, any other that are in military danger? So we're talking about what would the PPC position be on allied countries, so countries that are pro-Canada, and currently under threat of falling under the curtain of either Russia, China, Pakistan, Iran, someone who is actively non-Canadian. Is there a PPC policy to support them?
Yeah, look, there isn't a specific policy for those countries. I don't think anyone is against helping out people who are in need, but it has to be realistic. So let's say hypothetically that the People's Republic of China decides to invade Taiwan. Mm-hmm. Okay, so what are you going to do? You could send them night vision goggles and sniper rifles. It's immaterial. So if one of the first rules of military engagement is you have to be able to have a chance of winning an engagement. Okay, are we prepared to send the Canadian military, for example, to Taiwan to defend Taiwanese sovereignty? I think realistically that probably isn't going to happen. So I'm not against supporting our allies with equipment and money insofar as it attains a reasonably achievable goal. But
So,
I don't.
Let's back it off a bit to give it a bit easier, maybe harder. Like I understand what you're saying. Like if China invades Taiwan, like what are we going to do? They send
Right.
But let's talk more like Ukraine, which is under threat. So they still hold it, but we're talking about maybe giving aid to deter potential aggression. Like would that be something the PPC would consider, where you have a country like Ukraine, which would we? I mean, and again, it doesn't have to be all Canadian. We're talking about leading our allies to say, okay, stand up to Russia. I mean, this is one of the great Stephen Harper moments, in my opinion, is Stephen Harper gets on the world stage, goes up to Vladimir Putin, and Trudeau's hot mics are, it's a nonsense, but Harper's was intentionally, I will shake your hand, but you have to get out of the Ukraine. Now, did that stop Russian aggression? No. But do you think there's some important symbology of sort of saying, okay, these are our allies, they're under threat, so to prevent potential aggression, we will there is, what are you saying, are there conditions where certain foreign aid to allied countries who are under threat of falling under malign anti-Canadian influences would be warranted?
So yes, but like again, it would be in very rare circumstances. I think we have to be extremely careful when we get involved in other countries' conflicts. I actually spent in 2014. I spent a number of weeks in Ukraine. I was in my final year of journalism school, and I didn't have many courses, and there was a lot of crazy stuff happening there. And so I arrived in Kiev shortly, not too long after the government had fallen, the kind of Russian-backed government. Mm-hmm. And then I traveled across the country. I was in Donetsk, which is a city very close to the Russian border. And at that time, there were all these kind of pro-Russian separatist protesters who were gathering around a large statue of Lenin in the central town square. I was in Crimea for the infamous referendum in March of that year. Look, these struggles and these conflicts, they're so deep rooted in issues that don't really pertain to Canadian sovereignty. And so, realistically speaking, if Russia wants to take over Ukraine, Russia can take over Ukraine, and that's not a good thing if they take over Ukraine. But the question is, look, if you're not prepared to really go all in and you don't have the power to stop something, I don't think that you should be, pretending that you have some kind of power that you don't have. If it were a situation like with Israel, for example, I think it's different. But with these kind of very old conflicts in Central, in Eastern Europe, I think that we have to be very careful before we go in and start tipping the scales in one direction or another.
I think that's a fair answer, and we'll get on here. So Rick wants to know, ask about George Est, which of course we all know is George Springer. So the Blue Jays have him at leadoff playing DH because his leg. Okay, so I guess that is the sort of George Soros. I don't know exactly what you want, but I mean, are you taking money from George Soros?
Oh yeah, look at me. I'm just I got my check yesterday, right? That's why I'm running for the PPC. Look, if I were running for the Conservative Party, maybe you might be suspicious of that. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, obviously not.
Okay, excellent. Okay, we got some new. Okay, let me scroll down the chat. We got some new stuff. Thank you everyone for being in the chat. Thank you everyone who's liked and shared the video. It really helps. Okay. So here's how about Melissa Lantsman, who supports for extremist narratives like the hijab is empowerment. Also, I will say the Niqab. She's now pro Niqab. So I guess this is it. You're running against Melissa Lantsman, correct? Right.
Right.
Melissa Lantsman, if you guys missed this, in 2015 she was against the Niqab in citizenship ceremonies. She's since had a come to Muhammad moment, I guess, and now no longer thinks the hijab oppresses women. It's now a symbol of feminist empowerment. This thing is this a point of dissension? Would do you think the Niqab is a symbol of feminist empowerment? And Where's your position? Does the PPC have a position here?
I don't look. Again, this is an issue. Our policy deals with the major issues that Canada is facing at the current time. We don't have a policy specific to the Niqab, but I'll tell you what my personal position is on this. I've spent a decent amount of time around Muslim people, and I have a lot of respect for them. I obviously, realize that there's a lot of problems in the faith and that are not resolved. And I definitely agree. The niqab is something that is oppressive to women. I believe in treating people with respect, but that treating people with respect, doesn't mean that you have to compromise on the truth. So, while I would always treat someone who is in a niqab with it's not her fault that she's wearing a niqab, and you can't. There's never an excuse to be rude or bigoted towards someone. But the fact that you have people who are conservative starting to buy into this leftist line tells you what you need to know about the Conservative Party, right? So if I could kind of summarize it. I believe in treating people with respect, and I can appreciate people from all different backgrounds, but that doesn't mean that I agree with them. It simply means that I will treat them with the basic dignity that they all deserve as being, human beings created in the image of God. At the same time, though, it's BS that you would suggest that it's a symbol of female empowerment, and that's just
that was me more reading into Lanceman's tweets.
Yeah, but that is kind of that's the takeaway, right? The takeaway is like, there's nothing to see here, right?
Yeah, in 2015 she understood that. I mean, this is me speaking, not the PPC. I mean, the niqab is so clearly rooted in misogyny.
Yeah, absolutely.
I have no problem with the hijab, right? But I do think I've read some Islamic scripture, and it's pretty clear that the face of a woman and their hands are supposed to be uncovered. Like there's no Islamic Quranic justification for the niqab. It's simply an overly extremist human interpretation of some passages. And the hijab doesn't rob anyone of any part of their humanity, right? Sikhs can wear a turban, women can wear hijabs, Jewish people, religious Jews wear their own outfit. Great. There is something, though, to not being able to read someone's facial expressions and being denied a certain sense of...
that's why I hate these masks that have been forced on us in the last year, right? Like it takes away all of the facial cues, and your whole psychology changes when you're in a mask or when you see someone wearing a mask.
Yeah. All right. So let's get to some other questions here. Here's a question from Derek that I'm not really in agreement with, but we ask the questions. Would the PPC be interested in getting rid of the first past the post voting system and looking to setting term limits for career politicians? So that's a two-parter. One is, how does the PPC feel about electoral reform, which Trudeau promised, but in my view, thankfully never committed to, and term limits for politicians? Has this been discussed?
I think I do think we need electoral reform. Because you could have situations where a party like the PPC gets say 10% of the vote, but maybe only gets 2 or 3 seats, right? When in fact 10% would be over 30 seats. So when you have multiple parties, I think it encourages participation, and it encourages diversity of opinion. Like you get the full political spectrum. So you would have more real conservatives actually in your parliament, and you see this in Europe, for example, where you have proportional representation. I understand that it leads to a little bit more instability when it comes to forming governments. And look, this is kind of an age-old debate, right?
Yeah, I'm glad you at least acknowledged.
No, I definitely do, but I just think that maybe having your government be inherently a little weaker isn't always a bad thing, because it tends to be always governments that are taking away our rights and freedoms. So maybe if they have a little bit more difficulty doing that, maybe that's not always a bad thing, right? Like we don't tend to think of a place like Holland, which has proportional representation, as some kind of horrible, unstable country, right?
Yeah, that's the thing. All right, so good answer. And then, term limits for politicians.
Yeah, the term limits. Yeah, I that's not a bad idea. Look, if in the US you can only run for 2 terms, nobody should be in politics to make a career out of it, right? You should be there to
hit it and quit it.
Yeah, hit it and quit it. You got to do what you came there to do, which is to, in the case of the PPC, restore freedom to Canada, and then you have no business being there. If you're just there for your own self-interest, then you're past your expiry date. You need to go home.
So I guess this one's slightly related from Kyle. Is the PPC willing to lower pensions for politicians?
I vote in favor of that. Yeah.
Okay, that's good enough. All right. Will you upgrade the punishment/consequences for political corruption?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look at the situation that we've had with the WE scandal and with the SNC Lavalin scandal as well. So look, if there's no consequences, people will behave in whichever way they want.
Yeah. So, okay, increase. I mean, Trudeau got a very big. Didn't he have to pay $300 for something for SNC Lavalin? That was ridiculous. And a bit. Okay.
Oh, poor guy. I'm sure he feels it.
All right, so here's a question about immigration. What is the PPC's position on immigration? Plus, does Sam and the PPC believe Canada and Canadians have their own identity? So they want to know a bit about the PPC's immigration platform and a question on Canadian identity.
Absolutely. That's actually one of the things that differentiates the PPC from all of the other parties that are currently in Parliament. So we have approximately 300,000 to 400,000 newcomers to Canada every year. I think we can all agree that immigration is a good thing, that all of our ancestors obviously came here as immigrants at some point in time, but it has to be done in such a way as is sustainable. And so what the PPC would like to do is it would like to reduce immigration to 100 to 150,000 people per year. A lot of people will see that as a far right position, but that's ridiculous because a truly far right position would be like no immigration, and that's not what we're saying. And
you have John Chrétien's view on immigration, essentially,
right? And right. So and that's the thing. The whole political spectrum has shifted, right? Like the overlay on the like our societal kind of concept overlay of what is right and left has now moved all the way over, and so now the liberals. The PPC of today is like, has the liberal platform of like, maybe 40 years ago, and the Conservative Party, is now the Liberal Party of 10 years ago. Like, it's absolutely insane. So yeah, and all immigration needs to be merit-based, and you have to be really careful with generous family reunification plans because, you can't bring the whole world here. And if you're bringing people here who are not able to work, they also need healthcare. We have a universal healthcare system. The way I conceptualize this and explain to people is like on the airplane when they give the announcements in case of a crisis, like secure your mask before helping someone else put on their oxygen mask. Oh, yeah. You need to help. I'm happy that Canada can help as many people as they can, and I'll give a bit of an inside story on this. And it ended up being 54,000 Syrian refugees we took in. Our number was about 5,000 per year, and then Justin Trudeau came in, and it was 50,000. All right, so I did some work for a group, Project Abraham, which was bringing in Yazidis, so the people actually persecuted by ISIS. Yeah.
And it was all done privately with this group, and the Yazidis were mostly brought in privately. They didn't get a lot of government help. However, we did know some people in the public system, and for the people who came through the standard immigration, these Syrian refugees who were coming in, the caseworker, it's like they were so overworked that you were lucky if you got to talk to them maybe twice a year. The average was like you got to, because they were so overwhelmed, a immigration caseworker could speak with these families like 1.2 times a year. So we didn't have the capacity to support 54,000 Syrian refugees. And we could have helped, again, our number is 5,000 a year. If we doubled that to 10,000, maybe we could have had hey, this is the crisis, pull up your socks moment. Let's go into overdrive and get it done and maybe do that. But we just didn't have the capacity to help 54,000.
Yeah, and unfortunately,
no one by trying to help everyone.
Right, and unfortunately, it's like, okay, so either you believe that we have borders or we don't. Okay, so if you don't believe in having borders, then sure, open the floodgates. You're not going to like what your country is going to look like within the next year or two. You're going to have a lot of social problems from this influx of people from other dysfunctional countries. Now, if you do believe in having borders, as we do, then the debate becomes, well, what is the reasonable number? So, to the people who think that 150,000 or 100,000 is unreasonable, well, you're okay with 300,000 or 400,000. Why isn't that too small a number? Why not 800,000 a year, right? Like, so the number shouldn't be, just some kind of arbitrary figure. It should be something that's based on what the country can reasonably absorb. It has to be merit-based, people who have the skills that we need here in Canada, and these refugee programs should be administered in such a way as prioritizes persecuted groups around the world, and is done in conjunction largely with local private organizations like synagogues, churches, people who are actually willing to help integrate these people into Canadian society and care for them, so that you don't end up with a whole bunch of people living in an apartment block and you get all kinds of gang and social issues down the road. Right now, on the issue of Canadian identity,
thank you for remembering that. Good on you.
Right. Yeah. So the problem is we've had this kind of multicultural ethos for the last several generations, and unfortunately I don't think people really understand what true multiculturalism is. A lot of people think that multiculturalism is food or something very shallow like that, like, oh, I get Greek food or I get Italian food.
And I think to be kind to the general Canadian population, which is very understanding, and that's good. I think we have a very great, tolerant, accepting society.
Yeah.
And I think people think of multiculturalism as being nice and ethnic plurality, which we all agree with. Like,
right.
No one is legitimately against ethnic plurality, which is people look different, and that's fine. People come from different places, and being nice to people, which is a Canadian, I think,
of course,
kindness and acceptance is a Canadian value.
Yeah.
I think what we were talking about, though, is the political philosophy, or at least the social philosophy of multiculturalism, which says, all cultures are equal, and we are a nation of many different cultures. And I think that's a very dangerous idea.
And this is kind of what I want to get at. So at the what makes a culture different? What makes one culture different from another? At the root of it, right? And why are some countries dysfunctional, and why are others successful? And if you look at, say, Afghanistan, for example, it's not that the air quality is different, or that the terrain is different, or that there's something in the water that makes that place dysfunctional. There is an underlying cultural issue there. Even though there are many wonderful people there, there is, on the whole, in the aggregate of all the people and their culture, an element that makes it dysfunctional. So exactly. So when we talk about Canadian identity, we need to be talking about what Canadian values are, because values are what informs your culture. So what are our values? So our values, are the Judeo-Christian values. They are Western values. And that comes with, accepted social norms and expectations, our legal system, the rule of law, limited government, checks and balances, and constitutional government, charters, all of those kinds of things. And that is what we need to be uniting on. And there is also kind of the bicultural consensus, right? Or like this kind of, French, Anglophone, Francophone cultural historic basis for Canada, and that is something that we can build on, to integrate new people into that. And so we need to encourage the customs and traditions that come out of that, to help people, to give people a sense of home and a sense of pride in their new culture.
And I like how you said to help people, because one of the things I usually try and explain to people who have some initial hesitance to stuff like this, and just fears of coming across as racist, is like, no, to help people immigrant, if you really believe in coexistence with the immigrants, which I do, they need to adopt some Canadian values to survive in Canada. Like, we talk about, what is, like, hockey is a great one. They talk about, like, the cultural benefit of hockey. You think hockey is a very Canadian thing and serves a very important social function if you break it down. Like, Canadian winters are hard, okay? I have my second biggest audience actually in India, okay? No problems with India. It's too hot, okay? Too hot up there. I'm never going to India in the summer. But, you might not realize Canadian winters are cold, they're long, they're dark, and you can feel a sense of isolation. So having a team sport, right? A place where we can come inside, work together, have coffee, come all in for a singular purpose to watch something, sports build teamwork. It actually serves sort of a cultural value. And I mean, this is kind of why Christmas became such a big deal, maybe in the European, Western tradition. Again, happens in the dead of winter. Families come together, make sure to come together and socialize. In the dead of winter in a big country, you might not see people. These things form social value and have significant purposes. And to just say, you know what, you can pretend it's Somalia here, And what's the difference? Like, no, Somalia, one, way too hot. Again, too hot. But Somalia, it's not a real nation. It's a tribal nation. And we don't have tribal values here. And if you try and live like you're in a tribe in Canada, it's just not going to work. You're going to be out of flux. You're not going to succeed. Like, we want
Right.
Canadians to come here and succeed. And to succeed
Yeah.
as an immigrant, you have to not fully become Canadians, but you need to, like, it's a give and take. If you're going to say immigrants are going to give us something, the food, the culture, whatever, yes, it's a give and take. They have to take something from Canada and adopt that as well.
The other thing here too that's very problematic is that, so, and this is far more sinister, and you cannot blame any immigrants for this problem. This is an old stock Canadian created problem, and that is the self-loathing.
Yeah.
If you look at the broader decline of Western culture, I think it's very unique in the context of history that it's, our culture, sure, there's a bunch of problems with our culture. We're decadent and we're complacent and, we're hedonistic. But I think what is unusual about our decline as cultures is the self-loathing, the self-hatred, the self-deconstruction and the self-criticism. And so if you are teaching the children of immigrants to this country that this country is inherently a terribly oppressive and nasty place, then you have no narrative, no cultural narrative to assimilate to, or which you can aspire to. And so if you look in literature, for example, the concept of heroes is very important, because heroes are something that you aspire to. We even have this in our own family trees. You're proud of your father, your grandfather, your great-grandfather, and you aspire to be like them. Now, if someone goes and tells you, well, these were just all nasty, evil people, then there's a void there, and you'll have to fill that void with something else. And so I think what someone pointed out once was that then people kind of recede back into their previous cultural identities, which they brought with them from their other countries, because they have nothing here to be proud of, nothing to latch onto, nothing to kind of rally around. And so that's why we shouldn't be renaming streets. That's why we shouldn't be tearing down statues. We acknowledge the mistakes.
The PPC will not rename Dundas Street Dr. Theresa Tam Boulevard?
Well, absolutely not. We'll maybe we can withhold some federal funding to the city of Toronto to make sure they don't do that.
All right, perfect. So let's move on to David's questions here. Thank you so much for answering these. We got a lot. So what's Samuel's position, or the PPC position, on healthcare in the two-tier system like Germany has?
Yeah, healthcare is a sacred cow to many Canadians. And the problem is that we are in a giant bubble. So you get in your car and you can drive thousands of kilometers east and west, and you do not see any other system. And so you don't know that it can be better and that it can be different. But I think many of us who have had firsthand experience with the Canadian healthcare system realize that it has vast shortcomings. It is, of course, a provincial issue. But look, it's a socialist system. And what is like, anybody who's from the former Soviet Union will tell you that one of the fundamental features of socialism is long waits, usually lineups, and shortages, right? And so when there's no market incentive to include, to provide more supply of healthcare, then there will not be enough when the cost is functionally zero. So we can make sure that everyone has healthcare. That's not the issue. Other countries are able to do that as well. But we can do so in a way that where everyone has better healthcare. But the problem is that what bothers people is not the fact that people could have, on average, or that the floor of the healthcare, would be much higher. It's that some people would have better healthcare than other people, and they would pay for it. And that's what bothers people, because the left, they're egalitarians. They think that everybody has to be equal. So it doesn't matter if we're all equally worse off. All that matters to them is that we're equal. And that's why, for example, places like Cuba, even though the people live in poverty and misery, it doesn't bother them, because at least they're equal. They would much rather pick at income inequality in the United States, where the floor of the poorest of the poor is on average much higher. So let me give you an example. And sorry, I've gone on for a long time here, but
that's what you're on here to do.
Over at Bayview and John, which is in Thornhill, there is a private clinic called the Shoulders Clinic. You may have heard of it, and they do hernias. Okay, There are obviously a plethora of various options for dental care, okay, for cosmetic surgery and what have you. All these function very well. You're treated like gold because you're a customer. There is absolutely no reason why people need to suffer the indignity of our terrible public health care system, which has some of the lowest levels of hospital beds in, among comparable countries, when you could have private clinics for knee surgery, for elective surgery, the hip surgeries, you could have private specialists, right? And again, you can get everyone health care. That is not the problem. The point is doing so in a way that encourages there to be a high level of service, quality, and supply.
That's a good answer. All right, so let's put you another.
So the answer is yes.
Okay, I think the answer is yes. Okay, so what's a PP stance on faith and culture and politics, specifically about God/Jesus? If PPC leans secular, what separates it from the CPC, LPC, NDP at all? Who have led Canada to more and more dangerous and chaos and division? I'd argue, okay, we'll take his argument out of it because it's a question to you, but he'd argue that lack of faith in politics is contributing to this. So what is the PPC's stance on church and state?
Yeah, so I think we have to acknowledge that whatever our, whoever we are, whether we're Christian, Jewish, atheist, Muslim, we all have a philosophy of life. And so, people say, oftentimes if you say, well, that it's not right that we do this in our country, and my religious convictions inform that, and then they say, well, no, you should keep your religion out of politics. But if they're an atheist, for example, they also have a moral code which is informed by some philosophy and someone's writings and someone's thoughts, and they impose that on you. And so the question shouldn't be who, that you're not allowed to say bring your Jewish faith or your Christian faith to bear on political issues. The question should be one of do we have the correct values, right? And I think we have to acknowledge, as I did earlier, our country is formed on a Judeo-Christian basis, right? Things like the Ten Commandments is the basis of our legal system. If you go back in history, right? Every aspect
I would argue our legal system is actually very Talmudic. I mean, this is when we talk about Judeo-Christian values, I actually think we have Judeo-Christian secular values. I think it's all three that we have. The concept of nationhood is very Christian, and the individual very Christian, and nationhood also comes from the Jewish nation. But the biggest thing is the difference between murder and manslaughter is a very Talmudic, it's the Talmud.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, no, for sure.
The Talmud gets too insane. If your goat kicks over a fence and then it lands and spooks a farmer who then knocks a tree down and kills someone,
right?
Is that it gets
no, I agree. So we're cutting ourselves off at the legs if we basically want to deconstruct all that and just throw it away, right? That's terrible, right? So no, I mean that is our culture. That's Western culture, whether we like it or not. I like it. I would like to keep our traditions and our legal systems and the laws that we have, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. I think these are great concepts. And whether we like it or not, we all have moral values that we bring into the debate. In the PPC, that is going to be very candidate specific, right? Because you're going to find people of all different backgrounds and philosophical persuasions on, once you kind of zoom into their philosophical nucleus. I'm a Christian, okay, so that informs my my worldview, and I think that what unites us all in the PPC is the values that we all share in common, and I think there's a tremendous amount of things that we all agree on and can all work together to move this country in a better direction than it is now.
All right. Good. All right, here comes the abortion question. You can't go open up to the audience without getting a question about abortion. So
great.
Thank you for asking. What does this PPC stand on abortions? Will they legally put some legislation in place? So
yeah, the PPC, it's a lot like the last question actually. So the PPC does not on these very contentious social issues. The PPC does not have official policy platforms on those issues. But what they do, and this is what I really respect, is they allow their individual candidates to would allow their individual candidates to vote freely on these issues. So I am staunchly pro-life, and so for example, they recently had a bill to ban gender selective abortion, for example. And I believe
the vast majority of Canadians support, by the way.
Right, and many conservatives. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Aaron O'Toole voted against that bill.
He would be terrified. He would be terrified to. No,
right.
He voted for. He vote. Yeah. He voted in. Aaron O'Toole voted in favor of gender selective abortions, and that was purely so no one could yell at him about abortions on the campaign trail, which.
Right.
It's a standard CPC.
It would be wrong. You get into politics because you believe that there are things that your country needs to improve on. And I think that this is a real blind spot. However,
you get into politics because, if you get reelected twice, you qualify for a pension. But yes.
Well, we're going to vote. We're going to vote to reduce that pension. So
that's true. Yeah.
I think what we also have to acknowledge is that, as it's been said before, that politics is downstream from culture, right? So there's no point as a political party, trying to enforce something down people's throats that they don't want, that will be reversed in 2 or 3 years anyway, right? You have to kind of read the audience, and when the support is there for it, then you can start to shift things over. Even though it is really a stain on our country that this continues to go on. We're one of the few countries in the world that doesn't have any laws governing abortion. And I believe that goes back to a Supreme Court ruling that did strike down a law back in the I think it was the 80s. So you can have a partial birth abortion in Canada. It's the Wild West. You can do whatever you want. And I think even if you have there's a spectrum of different opinions on the abortion issue. And I think there's a lot of people that, for example, would at least be comfortable with placing some limitations on it, right? Like if something, if a child, I have 3 kids, and I've seen the miracle of birth 3 times, and I can tell you that it doesn't matter if they're still in the womb 3 minutes before they're born; they're still very much a human being, and it's no one has any right to deprive them of their life. That's wrong.
All right. Okay, so here's another stance on. Will you take a harder stance on gun power? Rick, I'm going to try and get and reword this question of so I mean, the big thing that Aaron O'Toole, one of the big things Aaron O'Toole is going to yell at is he, gunned, and they're trying to put him as sort of a gun nut. So I think
he's not enough of a gun nut for me, Daniel.
Yeah, so I think this is sort of okay. We see gun violence in the news.
Right.
We see big, scary black guns, and I'm very scared. I'm very, very scared.
Yeah, but those are not the big, scary black guns are not the ones that are being used in the crime stories, though.
Yeah, exactly. So, what would be the PPC? Is there a plan to, let's say we have a couple things of legal gun ownership, right to carry arms, but also gun crime. Like what is the PPC position?
Okay, so
all amalgamated, and I think you kind of intuit what we're trying to get at here, right?
Yeah. So you're probably somewhat familiar with how gun ownership is regulated in Canada, correct?
Incredibly regulated, yes. I mean,
okay, yeah,
a license and yeah.
Right. So like I am a legal gun owner, okay, and I enjoy occasionally target shooting. Now, one of the awful things about gun regulation in Canada is that firearms can be arbitrarily reclassified for no meaningful reason other than that they look scary. When in fact, and this is what so many people just don't understand because they have no experience with firearms, is that many guns are functionally identical to one another, but simply because of their color or the additional kind of hardware that they have on them, they look scary, and then they get targeted by the press or
assault style weapons, semi-automatic.
Right. So Canadians.
Again, right, I'm a big city Toronto boy, so my gun knowledge is relatively low, and I've educated myself. But one of the things I first learned, like when you first learn what semi-automatic means, it's like semi-automatic means like you click the trigger once and one bullet goes out.
Right. So you have like kind of classic 22 like small caliber plinking rifles that function in a semi-automatic manner, and those guns are no statistical threat to anyone. So it would be kind of like saying, so, and then there's these other firearms that they want to, like the AR-15, et cetera, right? Again, or AR-15 style rifles. These are not the rifles that are being used in inner city crime. And to go and ban them would be like banning like a radar, a van after the Alec Manassian attack on Yonge Street, that horrible attack, right? It's the same kind of logic, right? So the guns that are coming over the border from the States are, by and large, the guns that are being used in crime.
Yeah, so I think like this.
Yeah.
So we're talking about. I mean, okay, let's cut the BS. Let's talk about like it is here. We do have gang violence, and we do have guns. America has a Second Amendment constitutional right to carry.
Yeah.
There's nothing you could. Illegal guns are coming on from the States. It's gang violence. What is the PPC's plan to actually reduce what we're talking about? Gang violence, illegal gun crime. There are bad things happening. We know it's not. We know the regulations are ridiculous. The PPC comes in. There is a problem. It's not the solutions being put forward by the liberals and conservatives make no sense. What are the sensible solutions here?
Yeah, so the first thing is to acknowledge what the problem is and to stop scapegoating the legal gun owners. So any changes to Canada's firearms policies need to be made at Parliament and not by orders in council, et cetera, not by the RCMP. So that's the first thing. Acknowledge what the problem is. Stop targeting gun owners and make legal gun owners who are law-abiding citizens' lives easier because they are not a threat to people. That's the first part of it. The second part of it is making sure that there are strong punishments for people who are engaged in gun violence to deter them. But at the end of the day, everyone would like to have a magic bullet solution. So yeah, you can police more strictly. You can enforce harsher sentences for people in an attempt to deter them. But this goes back to our conversation on culture. In these gangs, there is obviously a gang culture that is flourishing in certain places. Okay, and oftentimes this has to do with young men who grow up in fatherless households, and it's present in the music that they listen to. Glorification of violence and kind of this very gangster rap gaudy lifestyle. Those are longer term things that take on the ground hard work from people to really change people's hearts and minds. There is no magic bullet political solution to that.
Thank you for saying that. And it takes balls as a politician to say that, but I've been waiting. It's refreshing to hear someone say, like, listen, it's a complicated issue. There is no silver bullet. We can't just pass a law and make things go away. There are things here. Now, I will point out one thing. I think we kind of hit on the cultural issue, and I always say this, and I think you'd be open to this, but I think school choice is a big one at breaking up the culture, because one of the problems we have in low-income neighborhoods is you have a hardworking immigrant mother or father of 5 kids, and they want the best for their kids, not to malign them, but you're immigrant, you're coming, you're starting fresh. So you're not living in, you're not Drake's neighbor on the bridle path, okay? You're living in a low-income neighborhood. Your schools are nowhere near as good as everyone else. By mandating that you have to go to these crappy schools because they're in the area, well, it doesn't matter how good your parent you are. Like, it might matter, but 95% of parents, if 50% of the kids in your kid's school by the time they're in the 10th grade are affiliated with the Bloods or Crips or whatever, your son stands a very small chance of success in that environment. But if you have the ability to say, all right, I will send my kids an hour on the bus to go to a better school because the school voucher, because we have the right to movement, I do think that is a big step forward of giving good parents who might be in lower income situations the tools to make sure their kids don't go down the path of gangs.
Yeah, I think that would help the solution. I think that it's many different factors, including the whole concept behind welfare as well. And then you get a lot of people who are in the same situation, kind of packed together in the same housing complexes. And, at a certain point in time, when people start to suffer the consequences for bad decisions that they make, oftentimes that is deterrent to stop those people from making the same decisions that are leading them to those outcomes. It sounds harsh, right? But it also dissuades other people. Whereas if the government just keeps kind of funding people, or who are in these situations, oftentimes it's incentivizing the continuation of those behaviors that lead to those outcomes. But on the issue of school choice, okay, and I should add, so any kind of like welfare programs you should always attempt to administer those at the localist level possible, because that's where you're going to have the most accountability, and local people will have a much better idea of how best to distribute funds to people who truly deserve it. But on the issue of school choice, it isn't just a good idea to help alleviate the social ills that you find in certain neighborhoods, but it's also fundamentally just to people who aren't using the public school system. So there's a lot of people, particularly in religious communities, such as in the Jewish community or in the Christian community, who don't want to send their kids to the public school because the public school doesn't represent their values. And so they're paying twice. They're paying taxes so that other people's kids can go to school, and then they pay a whole pile more money to send their own kids to a good quality private school, or maybe they homeschool. So what needs to be done is some kind of a voucher system that puts the money in the hands of the parents, not direct funding from the government to a school, because what that does is it basically gives the government sway over what is being taught in that school, and that's the last thing that you want. So on this issue, that is something that could have a dramatic impact on our culture in the long run, is school choice. And while it is a provincial issue, there's so much money that gets sloshed around from the federal government down to the provincial level that, if you start holding some of that back to encourage better policies, maybe that wouldn't be a bad thing.
I agree. All right, I'll just say we're coming near an hour, which I'm happy to keep going. I think it's going great. People are enjoying the chat. We're about
if you've got more questions, keep them coming. I'm just starting to relax, Daniel.
Okay, good. I'm going to keep you here longer. All right, so this is a good.
You see, I've got my cup here from the Daily Wire. The leftist tears one. Yeah. So.
Lots of tears coming in. Okay. Would Samuel be open, and PPC, I'll interchange them, to a constitutional amendment that removes Section 1 from the Charter of Rights and Freedoms? I'll read Section 1 to people just so everyone is sort of caught up here. Section 1, reasonable limits. So provision 1, the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms guarantees the rights and freedoms set out in subject only to such reasonable limits prescribed by law as can be demonstrably justified in a free and democratic society. So this is basically the sort of, you have rights and freedoms, but this is like
the
initial heading, the reasonable limits. So would the PPC be willing to say, all right, no to that?
Yeah, look, it's very tempting after what we've seen over the last year and a half to blurt out a quick yes, okay? But I think we have to look at the root of the problem here, and the root of the problem in Canada is not that Section 1 exists; it's that we have fundamentally, as a culture, shifted on what we think is reasonable, right? And so this is what a lot of people forget. So you can have the best charter, you can have the most amazing constitution, the greatest laws on the books, but once the culture changes, it doesn't matter, because if there's a clear majority in a country who wants something, they will get it. And there's a little bit of a lag, and those documents will protect you for a time, but and don't get me wrong, like, those documents need to be rock solid. Absolutely. They will help prolong liberty and the rule of law. But at the end of the day, so in other words, the laws that we have on the books today do not represent the current cultural consensus. They represent the cultural consensus of maybe a generation or two ago. So there's always this lag between social consensus and law, and the law is always playing catch up. So maybe it needs to be reworded. There will be situations, World War II, for example, if you were in the Battle of Britain, in England, in London, obviously that was a true emergency. But the problem is that, we're using these powers in a way which they were never intended to be used. So maybe we need to add a clause in there to say that, like, if there is a pandemic that happens with a mortality rate that is less than, or infection fatality rate that's less than 1%, and most of those people, are people who are have severe underlying health conditions or whatever. Like,
if the average age of death is higher than the life expectancy,
right,
and the
that it's not reasonable and demonstrable in a free and democratic society. So yeah, again, there's no easy answer to that, because again, it's a cultural problem. Like, politics, is not the answer to society, because if society was healthy, you wouldn't need these politicians, right? So, I mean, where politicians have a role is we do have a reverse effect on the culture, in that we could go and talk about things and get airtime and hopefully have an influence on things. But, you need to win the hearts and minds of your neighbors. You need to stop sending your kids to public school where they're indoctrinated to become, the next generation of leftists. Those are the things that you need to be focusing on. And yeah, of course, you need to vote PPC, but that's just one part of the equation.
And you need to like and share all the videos from the National Telegraph and blah, 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 blah.
And you need to like my campaign Facebook page, Samuel Greenfield for Thornhill.
And follow him on Twitter.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So
and then all your wildest dreams will come true.
That's the one silver bullet there is. It's following Samuel on Twitter and my Facebook page. All right. So this one I'm going to paraphrase. This is essentially a question on the UN Sustainable Development. He asked, what are your thoughts on this? So you've answered sort of shifting a lot of money over the UN, but I'll give you sort of the general, like, we're talking about UN 2030 goals and sustainable development. Realistically, what is the PPC's stance on sort of these globalist international agreements from the UN? Like, do you think there's a way out? What is,
Yeah, no, we are, in the kind of classical sense of the term, nationalists who believe in Canadian sovereignty. And so we do not accept the idea that a globalist organization with a whole bunch of hypocrites sitting on their councils can come and tell Canadians in their country, people who they didn't vote for, how they ought to be living their lives. And unfortunately, a lot of this stuff is founded on alarmism. A lot of people think that science is just science. It's just some kind of objective, bloodless pursuit that always ends up at the truth. And the reality is science, sadly, as we can see from the last year and a half, is depressingly influenced by people's personal biases in politics. And so, for example, climate change is a cause that the left has totally hijacked to push their own kind of agenda and to be used as a political football for politicians to have an issue to, scare people with, and then, promise a solution and get their vote.
Yeah, I think that's good. This is a very good question. This is definitely someone who watches my show. Question: when hyperinflation hits Canada, will the PPC have gluten-free bread in the bread lines?
If we have hyperinflation, there probably won't be bread in the bread lines.
All right, good answer. So, is the PPC center-right or libertarian, or just common sense conservative? How would you phrase the PPC ideology?
All of the above.
Okay, I like that. One of the things, I like the short, snappy answer.
These are great questions. I'm really grateful to everyone who's tuned in to watch this. This is actually really satisfying to be able to answer these questions.
Yeah, and yeah, thank you for being here. And like, politicians should do this and just be human. Like, Aaron O'Toole would explode if he did this. Okay, before we get to this question, I'll just tell you, I was invited to a Jewish community leader, and you'll like this because you're in Thornhill. I was invited to the Jewish community leadership thing with Aaron O'Toole, moderated by Melissa Lantzman. So I asked Aaron O'Toole why he was meeting with organizations that are openly affiliated with the Muslim Brotherhood and promulgate anti-Semitism, and boom, bumped out of the chat immediately. The chat was not.
There you have it.
So Melissa Lantzman does not want you to ask those questions. So, question: would Samuel support an amendment to the gun laws to make it lawful to use a gun for purpose of self-defense? Unlike now where that's unlawful. So we're talking about, would you change Canadian laws? I mean, if someone breaks into your home and they're high on, I was about to, I'm so CPC, PPC, CCP. What's the thing he forced in Training Day? Denzel Washington made Ethan Hawke smoke PCP.
Okay. Yeah.
They're a lot of P's and C's. Drugs. The crazy drug that makes you feel like you're invincible.
And it's 9:30, so you're
okay. Someone breaks into your house with malicious intent. They
Yeah.
broke it into your house. You are a legal gun owner. You shoot them in the middle of a robbery that's currently illegal in Canada. Will the PPC amend the laws on this specific issue?
So I think it's interesting because there are actually rare instances in Canada where you can defend yourself using your firearms. The problem is that it is so onerous on the person who's actually defended themselves from some kind of horrific crime or potential crime, and it shouldn't be that way. So obviously there has to be reasonable a framework around how this would work, right? Like, you can't just shoot someone because they went canvassing and knocked on your door and you didn't want them on your property and they happen to be for the PPC, right? There has to be a threshold where you could like, for example, in the night someone breaks into your house, they're not supposed to be there. You reasonably believe that they're there to cause you harm. You should be able to use your firearms for self-defense, and it should be easier to defend yourself. That should be fundamental to any free society. So yes, I would definitely, absolutely support making it easier for people to defend themselves with firearms in Canada. A lot of people aren't going to like that answer, but I did say, like, it has to be in a reasonable framework, but it should be easier than it currently is.
A good answer. All right, so here's one from Tom Dawson. Being a member of the local Legion, many vets have either been pushed back to the line or totally forgotten, as in No Trudeau claimed they were asking for more than we can give. What is the PPC's stance on what they would do for our vets?
Look, and again, a lot of people aren't going to like this answer, and I have a tremendous amount of respect for veterans, and they absolutely deserve to be treated as heroes and with the utmost of respect. The reality of the situation is that there is no money. The money is all gone, and we're deep in debt. So before we can talk about what we're going to give to groups of people, however deserving they may be, we need to balance the budget, and then we can talk about these things.
And I'll add to this one is, like, there are certain things that we can't find the money for funding vets, because, like, if it's 10 million, that's inconsequential. We're talking about millions, right? So I think we can agree on that point. And I think this is a good thing. We can talk about this and the securing mental health. And I think we talked about this earlier. Like, there are some issues where the answer is actually not throw tons of money at it. Aaron O'Toole's plan to secure mental health is throw money and counseling and funding, and whereas no one wants to talk about, okay, here are some pretty hard conversations we need to have. For example, I think this is a Jordan Peterson line, and true, and this is why I'll use my psychology background, but one of the best ways you can get vets over PTSD and sort of traumas of war is when they know that there was a fight between good and evil, right? You went to Afghanistan, you fought against the Taliban. The Taliban is evil incarnate. They rape women, they oppress women, they behead journalists, they drag people to their conception of the 7th century. It is hell on earth. You fought against that. So I think you've touched on a lot of these cultural issues, the sort of cultural masochism, as I termed it, that you talked about, self-loathing. And I think a lot of this might harm veterans and mental health. So we're not talking about, you get injured in war. I think funding rehab for vets injured in Afghanistan, I don't think the PPC is against.
Yeah, that is part of your when you're employed by the Canadian Forces, they are responsible to pay for you, and the Canadian Forces is one of the fundamental role of good government is to provide defense for its citizens. So that's not an issue, but it's when we get talking about a lot of extra money here, extra money there, before you could do that, balanced budget, right?
Yeah, balanced budget. I mean, and also you did that. And I think there's another thing to be said of, like, a lot of helping vets and a lot of people's mental health is sort of like, winning the cultural and pushing back against this, oh, you were just there for the oil, like you were in the billionaires. And I think there's a big thing culturally we could do for vets that, I mean, they're not, you go, Canada pays for your education to go to school after you served. You're just going to get someone yelling at you for how evil you were for 4 hours a day. And
yeah, you wonder too. Like, you look at the Second World War, or the First World War, and where many multiples of the number of soldiers that served in Afghanistan served in those wars, and you don't hear a lot of discussion about what their mental health was like, and but maybe it was terrible, or I'm sure there were a lot of problems.
This is sort of one of my areas of fascination. I'm a sort of a part-time amateur Canadian historian when it comes to First World War, and it's one of my interests. I mean, we do get the first. I mean, mental health and shell shock, comes from First World War, where it was then called battle fatigue by World War II. We did have to learn that by the Second World War, you have to rotate soldiers off the front line.
Right.
You can't have people experiencing constant artillery strikes. Your brain will snap if you're just constantly under threat. So we do have to find ways to sort of mitigate, and I've talked to veterans, sometimes they they love Canada, but they can't be inside when fireworks go off.
Right.
Because it's just too much. Like if they go out and they see them,
and I don't know what that's like, because I haven't experienced the sacrifices that they made. So it must be awful.
Yeah. So I think there's let's sort of kind of shift into the same gear of so Aaron O'Toole has a plan to secure mental health. I'm teasing Aaron O'Toole by overly securing everything, but
he wants to secure everything with more government. That's the problem, right?
Exactly, that's the problem. So but the PPC, I think mental health is a very important topic, and again, I love the fact you're right. The government, there is no silver bullet solution to mental health. We cannot make depression go away. But what would the PPC government's approach be to leading Canada onto the next frontier in the 21st century on mental health and how we deal with that?
Yeah, well, the government needs to stop contributing to the mental health crisis. So if you look at the isolation that has been brought about by lockdowns, people being cut off from their families, people being cut off from their support networks, from their counseling, etc. That is unconscionable that this has been allowed to take place. And so, if you care about mental health, then you're going to stop doing the things that are causing the problems in the first place. And that includes, by the way, confusing children, in grade school with regards to their gender. That also leads to mental health problems. So, if we just stop harming people with dangerous policies, that will solve a lot of the problem. The rest of it, unfortunately, again, a lot of these things are cultural, and they can't be changed by government. So if you are in a stable, functional family, and you're working hard and you're taking responsibility for yourself, your mental health is going to be better than somebody who doesn't have that. And so we need to promote the values that lead to stable social environments, so that people don't have mental health problems in the first place, rather than always trying to play catch up with more government solutions and throwing money at it. It's very simple.
An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure.
Absolutely. Yeah. Look, there are lots of people who have, legitimate mental health problems that are biological, they're genetically inherited. That is not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the stuff, but even those are exacerbated by these government policies, though. So, really just.
And we don't have time, I think, for the full fleshed out conversation, but there is a difference between someone, actively experiencing psychosis from, onset of delusion. Sorry, the baseball game just started auto playing on my thing. I had to turn that off. Anyway, I guess I'll have to. No one tell me what's happening in the Blue Jay game. I guess I'm missing that. So. Maybe I should have just turned it on mute. That would have been easier because I can pause it again. Okay. So government. Yeah, there's a difference between acute, onset, schizophrenic, someone who, society should be able to take care of the most vulnerable people who can't take care of themselves. And there's a difference between sort of anxiety, depression, sort of things that are manageable, but how do we manage them in society? All right. Let's move on to the next question. Oh, this is a tough one. Very tough one. What will your party do about mainstream media funding? Currently, it's about $600 million. I'm assuming the PPC wants to increase it to about $6 billion a year. Am I correct in that assumption?
Hey, I like the more zeros, the better, right?
So look, unlimited funding to the CBC.
Unlimited funding for all the media. They're going to love us now, right?
Check.
We just promised them that, yeah?
Yeah, Warren Kinsella gets to fill in the numbers for whatever the media gets.
Yeah, he'll run out of paper on the check, right?
Yeah. All right.
No. In all seriousness, though, how could you have a free and independent press when they're being paid for by the people they are supposed to be holding accountable? It is a travesty. Again, there are so many things that are going on right now where you almost have to pinch yourself and say, is this real? Are we actually doing this? This is so absurd and so antithetical to the values that made our countries wonderful places to live. We need to defund the CBC, and not as a cheap campaign pledge like Aaron O'Toole, who then flip-flops. Right? Shocking, yeah. Which makes you wonder, even if you liked anything he said right now and you were still going to vote for him, why would you have any confidence in him that he would actually do those things? And so, I went to journalism school, and of course, that was like 10 years ago, and there was all this hand-wringing about how, with everything moving onto the internet, the business model was changing, and how is all this media going to survive, and how are we going to have good investigative journalism? And lo and behold, I think we see what's happened now. You've got all these kind of like independent, crowd-funded outlets, just like the National Telegraph or many others, right, that all kind of play a role in kind of a media mosaic. And it's a much more balanced mosaic, right? Because it's like you got conservative outlets, you got liberal outlets, you got the full spectrum instead of just a whole bunch of center left to far left outlets paid for by the government. So I think what we have with our media is
Telegraph plug gets you 10 million votes. All right. I've called George Soros the deep state. Excuse me, Dominion voting systems. Yes.
10 million votes just in Thornhill, right?
Just in Thornhill.
In Thornhill. So no, cut all the funding. It'll help balance the budget.
Exactly. Okay, so I've put the next question up on the screen if you can see it. How would your party implement the removal of the Indian Act? And I'll give you some more leeway to sort of turn this into more general indigenous rights question. But this is the basis of, you've talked about repealing the Indigenous Act. You just got a big endorsement from one major chief, I think, yesterday because of this policy. So if you want to sort of articulate and expand on the PPC's position here.
Yeah, so essentially what we have here is we have a system which doesn't afford solid property rights to natives living on reserves, and if you don't own something, that holds you back, right? You don't have that same sense of pride of ownership and the ability to benefit from that appreciation of that asset, and then to be able to freely exchange that with someone else, in a mutually beneficial transaction. So property rights are the foundation of every prosperous economy, and so what we need to do is, it's the same issue. We just keep throwing money at problems and hoping that they go away. Maybe there are corruption issues. Maybe we need to be making sure that there's better accountability for how money is being spent on reserves. Maybe these kind of tribal count or these band councils are not always doing justice to their residents. So there needs to be a serious investigation and a plan put forth to replace the Indian Act with something that provides greater autonomy and ownership rights, private property rights to natives, with greater accountability for how taxpayers' dollars are being spent. But we also have to acknowledge that there is a widely diverse group of reserves. So some of them are actually doing very well, and some of them are not doing very well. This is I'll
add to this. This is one of the things we often never really talk about in terms of when we talk indigenous people, the First Nations. There was 2 years, arguably, from about 1812 to 1813, where we had the concept of pan-Indianism under Tecumseh, where he actually united all the different tribes under a singular banner. And that was really hard to do because the Mi'kmaq are not the Cree are not the Ojibwe, are not the Algonquin.
It's a very diverse community.
It's incredible, East and West, even with it, right? And the pan-Indianism essentially died with Tecumseh on the Thames. To sort of blanket, to try and I mean, again, so if we want to properly litigate this, we have to do this. This live stream would have to be at least 72 hours of going through all the different, band counts.
Yeah.
Doing well.
Yeah, I just want to throw the bare bones of the idea out there, right? And the bare bones is we have this new agreement between the Canadian government and the natives that is built on a foundation of mutual respect. It acknowledges that there's a lack of private property rights and a lack of accountability for how money is being spent on certain reserves. And I think that's reasonable. And I think a lot of natives appreciate that. And I think that if we really want to do them justice, then they need to have the same legal structures that we benefit from, like full property ownership. I think that's just fair.
I think that's a good one. Okay, so here's another question. This built on sort of what you said in the legacy media one. So I'm glad you kind of expanded on it there. So you've done a good work on this question, right? Two of the biggest factors in pushing our politicians and narrative these days seem to come from lobbyists and legacy media. How will the PPC tackle these giants and prevent themselves from becoming influenced by lobbyists in the future? I've proposed certain election financing laws to sort of mitigate the power of groups. I'll give my sort of simple solution on election finance. Take off all the limits on giving to campaigns. I think any Canadian citizen should be able to give any dollar amount they want to any political party. Zero donations from corporations, zero donations from foreign entities, only Canadian citizens, as much as they want, and all donations over, let's say randomly, let's take $1,000 are made public. So yeah, if you take $20 million from Galen Weston and Loblaws, you take 20 million, but everyone can see, oh, this guy has 20 million from this specific place. So everyone can see it. So you start governing and you say you give Loblaws a $20 million contract. Everyone can kind of see what you just did right there. So that's one way. And again, there's no silver bullet, but that's what I've been saying to my audience is sort of one way. And I'll give you the chance to sort of expand on this for yourself.
Yeah, I think the other thing too is that like the more highly regulated your business environment is, then the more kind of opportunity there is for this kind of lobbying skullduggery to take place, right? So let me give you an example of that. So when we had lockdowns, many stores had to close, and certain ones were allowed to remain open. And in fact, my opponent from the so-called Conservative Party here in Thornhill, Melissa Landsman, lobbied on behalf of Walmart, for example, and she's lobbied for many other corporations. Okay, now I'm still trying to understand exactly what it was that she did, but what ended up happening as a result of this, that, or the other thing was that Walmart stayed open, and many small businesses were closed. So the problem in that context, you can say, okay, yeah, there's this issue with lobbying. Okay, yeah, that is true. But what is the deeper issue here? The deeper issue is that you had a lockdown. So the government regulation opens up this window for some companies to receive better treatment than other companies. So many times I think that large corporations like regulation because it runs smaller businesses out of operation, right?
Who's cheering hardest for the $15 an hour minimum wage? Walmart. There's no one. Right. There's no one. 15. Make it 20. Listen, I'm playing Walmart right now. Auction 25. Target. I hear 30. Great, because inflation will take care of it. And what you're going to do is they can take those initial hits, but what they're immediately going to do is price small businesses out of the market, gain larger market share, and then whatever losses they recoup. Inflation, the money becomes valueless, and they get it there. So
right. So here's another example. So for example, like to anyone out there who likes to vape, okay, regulations in Canada have just recently changed that you can't purchase vape cartridges, that have above a certain nicotine content. Okay.
Assault style vape cartridges, you mean?
Right, and then you have. I think in the U.S., for example, I think the situation there is also not good for people who who vape. There's a lot of government interference there. So then you start to wonder, and I don't know what exactly is going on, but cigarettes are still legal. So what is going on there, right? You do wonder at a certain point in time, who is actually pulling the strings here.
And I'm going to kind of expand this because this is a problem that happens a lot more thing. This is also in like the opiate crisis too. And this is one, yes, corporate influence, But there's another thing of sort of, this is an essential failure of government and our love of regulations. It's hard to regulate old things, but it's really easy to regulate new things.
Right.
We have a big opioid crisis where, fentanyl might be flooding the streets and you got heroin and all this. And we have new treatment methods. So, I mean, a lot of people have heard about methadone, but we have better than methadone seems to be Suboxone. And there is sort of big developments on synthetic opiates that might not mess you up, but essentially can, because one of the problems is physical dependency on opiates. So make you mentally functional while dealing with the physical dependency with methadone, Suboxone. But the problem is when we come up with new opioid treatments and safer opioids, they're still opioids, and they get so overly regulated by the new, because opioid crisis, it's so hard to do something about what's already there. So there's something new. So we'll put all the regulations on Suboxone and make it nearly impossible to get Suboxone, when actually that's the new safer thing. And Suboxone's better than methadone, but it's so hard to switch from methadone to Suboxone because we have the government's love of new regulations, because it's harder to then put these laws on methadone because methadone's already there and it's grandfathered in, whereas Suboxone's new. So as it's new, as vaping is new, as fracking is new, it's
right.
I think
which, to go back to my point, whereas if you have a smaller regulatory environment, then it's, if something isn't being regulated, period, then there isn't any ability for a lobbyist to grease the palms of a politician if there isn't the appetite to lobby or to regulate in the first place, right? So we need to cut back regulation because, oftentimes, like I said, it benefits big business that they have the scale to deal with regulation. They have a large HR department to push paper around. But like a little guy who's, trying to do the paperwork in the evening and the weekends and go out and do the actual jobs during the day, it's not feasible. So it is absurd. But again, look, I have not been.
I could write an essay on what it's like to have less lawyers on your side than someone else.
I'm sure you can, by the sounds of it. Yeah. So look, the issue is also, I've never been a politician before. And so I don't have the experience of people coming and trying to grease my palms. So I think I like to think that, what goes on there is a function of the ethics that someone has. If they have good ethics, if they have good values, they're not going to be susceptible to this kind of, what lobbyism, it is a sense of sort of bribery in a sense, right? But I think what we need to do is we need to take people who have a lot of experience analyzing these kinds of specific situations. This is not necessarily my specific area of expertise. Might be more of my opponent's area of expertise. As a kind of a very experienced corporate lobbyist.
Oh, I've ranted about Melissa Lantzman.
And we need.
By the way, I predicted, like, when she was the underdog against Gila Martha, I said no, she's not. She's worked for all the right people. I've seen her resume. There's a 0% chance they don't force Melissa Lantzman into that spot. I've seen this movie before, so I've said it 1,000 times.
We need to get people together, who have the, and I think that's the quality of a good leader is, like, for example, I have a small business, right? And if I don't know the answer to a question for a customer of mine.
Hey, let's what business did you run? Let's promote this.
Yeah, so I don't want any more customers. Okay, I'm full up, but especially with my election, with my politicking now. So,
but it's also what's your background?
Yeah, so I studied journalism at Ryerson, and then I started a swimming pool maintenance business, and so I do residential swimming pool maintenance. And you meet a lot of very interesting things. You learn about business, and you learn about people, you learn about money. And but look, the big thing about being in a position of leadership or in a position of responsibility is that, you're not going to know the answer in every single instance. And then you need to be willing to admit that, and your success will be determined by your ability to get access to the people who do know the answers and get them collaborating on your project. And then it's a win-win, right? Because you brought in the best people, right? Actually, Donald Trump was pretty good at that, finding the right people for the right job. That was one of the things that made his presidency so successful, is being able to recognize talent and then harvest that talent to the greater benefit of everyone.
All right. So here's a question. What is the PPC's plan for Western provinces? Do you support our research jobs and our oil and gas industry?
Yes, yes, and yes.
Yeah, I mean, the PPC is pretty openly. I mean, Aaron O'Toole will scrap the Trudeau carbon tax and then impose the Aaron O'Toole.
No, we don't want to look. I'm sick of fuel's almost at $1.40 a liter. We need to scrap the carbon tax, and the left, the radical left, they're total hypocrites. They want to have a huge welfare state, and then they want to basically destroy the industry that is the backbone of the Canadian economy and would presumably help pay for this welfare state. It's nonsensical.
This is okay. I mean, what is the PPC going to do for Canadian farmers? I think scrapping the carbon tax is a great start. Do you want to expand on this at all?
Yeah, look, again, the issue is, the PPC doesn't pander to special interests, right? So, we want to see deregulation. We want to see the elimination of marketing boards. We do not want protectionism. I come from a family that has an agricultural background, it's I mean, farmers just need to be left alone by their government to be able to do their thing. And if their business is viable, they will survive. If my business is viable, I will survive. If it's not viable, then you have to get creative and do other things. But you can't expect to be constantly subsidized by taxpayers. And again, that's not something that a lot of people will want to hear. That is the reality of it. And of course, I recognize that our farming is absolutely, it's a critical industry, and Canadian farmers are good farmers, and they will adapt, and they will find a way to make money.
All right, good answer. Will the PPC reform or eliminate bureaucratic bodies that appear to serve no legitimate purpose, i.e. the Ethics Commission? Now, if there actually are punishments for ethics violations, which you institute, then I do think there is, then the Ethics Commission...
Yeah, then it wouldn't be redundant, right?
Yeah, then it would be redundant. I mean, if all the Ethics Commission can do is give you a slap on the wrist, so the Conservative Party can say, he violated the Ethics Committee.
Right.
Then there's that. But the broader question, will the PPC work to sort of reduce irrelevant government bureaucracy?
That's the platform we're running on. Smaller government,
I mean, you've said that 8,000 times, but it's in there. So.
I'll say it again. Yeah.
All right. So Kelmel has a question. Okay, it's about the polling and who does the polls and lagging the polls. I don't think that's a question you need to answer about who does the polls. I mean, that's we can get into that. Okay. Okay. What is your position concerning the powers and rights of the Attorney General in relation to his or her boss being the Prime Minister? I think this question is brought to you by Jody Wilson-Raybould's new book. But yes, I think people who've watched my show, I have screamed about SNC-Lavalin and how terrible it is. But now someone else is turning to scream about SNC-Lavalin.
Right.
What is?
Yeah. So I mean, obviously, this is a tough one because your AG is going to be a member of your government, and yet you still need to be able to have kind of an arm's length relationship between the two. That might be there's probably people who are better qualified to come up with the exact solution to that problem. Probably on a 10 o'clock on a Monday night, I'm probably not going to come up with a brilliant solution, but I will give it some thought because I recognize that there is a problem there.
Yeah. Okay. Easier one question. How do you propose we convince people to stand up to freedom this country used to have? So I'll interpret this question as something that PPC comes in. It's sort of like the culture war. Right. This is maybe not so much policy based. This is more out in the ethos, a more nebulous question. But how do you think we should go about, and you as politicians, how do we go about instilling, making the country better, healing the social ills? I think you understood what Murray was getting at there.
Yeah, absolutely. Number one, don't send your kids to public school. That'll do a lot of good. Okay, if all conservatives simply stopped sending their kids to public school, that would be an enormous step in the right direction. Secondly, you have to talk about ideas, and you have to inform yourself. You need to find people that have good ideas, and you need to listen to them. Obviously, there needs to be different perspectives that you take into consideration, but you need to have intellectual mentors, and then you need to talk about those ideas with your friends and neighbors, in a polite and respectful and intelligent way. And that's really the only way that you can win people over, right? Is just one person at a time, one heart at a time. You're never going to be able to force anything on anyone. That never works. So you have to convince people, and that's your responsibility. That's our responsibility.
All right. So here's another good controversial. Would the PPC consider a way of setting up ways to protect internet users, content makers from future and corrupt attempts at internet censorship, like Bill C-10, Bill C-34? We don't want to lose Daniel to the gulag, guys. I'm going to the gulag. You're joining me, but all aboard. I'm getting gulagged. It's going to be great times until I get taken out for too much political dissent. But how are you going to stop me from going to the gulag?
Yeah. So what we probably need to do is we probably need to update the Charter of Rights and Freedoms to have a more unequivocal position on freedom of speech. That would look something more like what it looks like in the States, and with the acknowledgement that you have to be able to tolerate nasty opinions from other people, with the understanding that in doing so, you're also protecting your own opinions from others. Freedom of speech wouldn't need to exist if all the things that people said were liked, reasonable, and polite, right? So, obviously there's a huge difference between people engaging in actions and a different and words, okay? And you need to allow people you need to have freedom of speech. It's very fundamental. So by doing that, that would help. By eliminating any kind of hate speech provisions, by eliminating any regulations on freedom of speech, that would help. But again, it always goes back to the culture. If you have a culture that values freedom of speech, it will ultimately be reflected in the codes, in the civil codes of the land. If the culture does not value freedom of speech, and our culture currently does not place on the whole a high value of freedom of speech, you're not going to have it. And that's where we're heading now.
Yeah, so let's get into sort of the counter arguments this year. And I think everyone knows I'm full on freedom of speech. I'm totally with you. Hate speech provisions, they're ridiculous. I mean, all religions are hate speech to all other religions. If you
right,
like you're a Christian, most Christians believe Jesus is the Lord and Savior and the second coming of God. That view is blasphemous in Judaism and Islam and Hinduism. And, all religions say they're the best, and that means the other ones aren't. I mean, if I say Islam is not the best, a Muslim could be offended, but Muslims say Islam is the best way. That's offensive potentially to everyone else. Atheists say you're all wrong. So we need to live in a space where it's legal to offend ourselves. Because
absolutely,
if you go down the logic of the hate speech route, we have to ban the Quran and then ban the Bible and then ban the New Testament. Like everything must be banned, right? Yeah. So I understand that. And you have made the distinction. There are words and there are actions. We do have racially motivated, religiously motivated hate crimes. Anti-Semitism is real. There is anti-Islamic bigotry. There is churches are burning. There's anti-Christian bigotry.
Yeah.
What do you see as the best way to reduce, not hate speech, but acts of hate?
Yeah, I mean, like acts of hate usually involve a crime of some kind, right? And so those crimes have to be punished with the appropriate punishment. So if you are if you're attacking someone, you're physically assaulting someone because they are Jewish, or you're burning down a church because it's a Christian church, or you are, vandalizing a building with some kind of, swastika, emblems or something on a building, as happened in Thornhill here recently. People have to be punished with the appropriate punishments, but you're not. You can't.
Because I get it. Like all hate crimes are actually crimes, and for things like you assault people, and this is assault, and we're talking about hate as a mitigating factor. So for things like, if I were to draw, a swastika on a synagogue, or draw like a pig as and label it Muhammad on a mosque, yes, this is just petty vandalism, but it's a bit more than petty vandalism when you put, aggressive symbols on a church or a mosque or a synagogue or something like this. You have to admit that, just spray painting a car and tagging it is a different level of crime than a swastika on a synagogue, or
yeah, of course. No,
or something on a church.
yeah, no, there's definitely a different level of malice besides behind something that's just a random attack of malicious property damage, and something like of that nature. But okay, so let's say somebody spray painted some swastikas on a synagogue. What would be an appropriate punishment for that? Okay, well, let's say it's a young person, who has got some stupid ideas, some hateful ideas. Maybe that person should be forced to go back to the synagogue, meet the rabbi, and apologize to the congregation there, and then remove the graffiti from the synagogue under the watchful eye of the police and maybe the rabbi, right? And so that there is kind of like this, in justice, the concept of restitution, making it right with people, right? And in the process, hopefully gathering some respect for those people, right? Now, again, there's a very big difference between physically assaulting someone and spray painting again, right? So there's always kind of levels to this crime, and you have to call it out. One of the things with anti-Semitism, for example, is calling out anti-Semitism as anti-Semitism and not diluting it with other isms. Oftentimes, there's kind of a plethora of other isms that people kind of like to throw in there, right? So not
it's
virtue.
Like, it's when things don't fit the standard left-wing narrative with
right.
Church. It's this thing is wrong, but so are these other 10 things that didn't happen.
Right, exactly. And not being willing to just address what the issue is at that given moment, right? Because oftentimes the left has a vested anti-Israel or anti-Zionism angle, and so all of a sudden, they can't make it look like, because look, Jews are a very small percentage of the population in North America and Canada and the U.S., and yet they are targeted at an unbelievably disproportionate rate in hate crimes. So there is a problem there for sure, and diluting it with other isms is not going to help make that problem go away. The appropriate punishments will help act as deterrents, and having good social values in your culture that promote treating each other as you would have others treat you.
Yeah. All right. So next question I put up on the screen: will the PPC open the equalization formula and make it work? Make it more fair? So is the PPC open to rejigging equalization?
Yeah, absolutely. Because look, the problem is that equalization is essentially welfare, and it's welfare for provinces. And if we don't, in theory, agree with having a massive welfare state when it comes to a whole bunch of other things, why would we want to have it on the provincial level? And so it's not fair that provinces that don't run themselves in a responsible way and therefore have no incentive to take the steps that would lead to greater economic growth, therefore greater tax revenue, are now being bailed out by provinces that have done, in kind of the COVID propaganda language, the right thing, right? Having a good business environment for people to develop natural resources or to, invest and build factories, etc.
All right, next question. Does the PPC support universal basic income?
Absolutely not. It's a horrible idea.
What do you mean free money? But it's money and it's free. What could go wrong?
What could go wrong?
Listen, I was watching Jagmeet Singh on TikTok today, and he made a really compelling point. He did this dance, and then he said that the rich have all my money, and all my problems would be solved if I had their money. Sorry. Okay.
He needs to go back to back to university and take a few economics courses.
Yeah. All right. So Rick, there's nothing wrong with your question. Sometimes I rephrase these questions just to make them a bit more general. So they can be, more people can get started. I was workplace accident and then acquired brain damage. Why did I have to wait 2 years to see a brain neurology specialist? And this is pre-COVID, so COVID had nothing to do with it. What would the PPC do to reduce wait time? So it's a very legitimate question. We're talking about essentially hospital wait times for very serious things.
So this connects back to our previous conversation on healthcare, right? Mm-hmm. So why do you have a wait time? Because you have a lack of healthcare supply in this area, and this is a known fact. There's a real shortage of specialists. So if you open up the healthcare market to innovation and for-profit healthcare, you're going to have a huge increase in capacity, and that will lead to a decrease in wait times. It's basic economics.
All right. Sorry. Oh, I just got skipped on. There's a lot of. Thank you everyone for your questions. Thank you everyone who liked and shared the video and participating. It's great here. Just excuse me if your question got buried because I skipped over and I can't go back. I'm sorry. Not a lot of insane questions, so I've been able to get most of them up. So if I skipped it, it wasn't.
We might have to make this the last question. I think I have to go soon, but I really enjoyed this. I could do this for another hour, but
yeah. You got a family, so okay. Let's it could be to mainstream media. Where's Thornhill? I'll answer that one. It's just north of Toronto. Okay. So here. Okay. Will the PPC help raise the pension to help survive with the cost of living? So we're talking about increasing people's pension. You know what? Okay, we've kind of covered this. This is newer. This is the last one. Let's say, God forbid, Conservatives get a minority government. Considering the bad blood between Max and the Conservative Party, what approach will the PPC take, as they will have a position of influence here? So if the PPC gains some sort of real legitimate influence and Aaron O'Toole is the leader, what is sort of the plan to, working with or against that government?
Yeah, so I mean, look, unfortunately, there is a lot of bad blood. I may have my ideas as to why that is, but I don't want to point fingers. That's probably not very helpful. If we're in Parliament and they're in Parliament, working together will be based on shared values. So it's very simple. If they have something that they want to put forward that aligns with the limited government, personal responsibility, individual freedom values of the PPC, we'll support it. It's very right. And if not, then no, it's not going to be based on some kind of schoolyard, childish tit for tat mentality. I mean, you have a responsibility to the people who elected you to make sure that the policies that would be aligned with your principles, the principles on which they chose you, get passed and voted through Parliament.
Yeah. So essentially, if the CPC had power and they were trying to sort of expand Trans Mountain and lobby, you would
then we will extend the olive branch and be more than happy to work with them.
Yeah, 100%. But if they put something forward that was, let's say, if they put forward another internet censorship bill, you would oppose them there. Right?
Absolutely.
It's if they put something that aligns with the values.
So it's not partisanship. It's principles.
Yeah.
Very simple.
I think that was excellent. And you know what, Samuel, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. Thank you for dealing with the general public, which it's really refreshing to see someone running for office do that. Again, Samuel is running in Thornhill. That's if the suburb. If you live in Thornhill. If you don't, I'm sure you have a PPC candidate. You can reach out to them. I'm sure their answers are quite similar. But again, as we learned, the PPC does tolerate a certain amount of individuality within their.
We're a big tent on the conservative spectrum.
Yeah, I mean, Phil likes to say he's a big tent, but if you don't agree with my platform, you're kicked out of caucus. Also, I'm going to flip up on my platform. So shouldn't he be kicked out of caucus? It's an interesting philosophy there.
Exactly. No, I thank you, everyone who's tuned in. It's you who and Daniel who give me the platform, and I'm honored to have that. Thank you for allowing me to share my thoughts with you. I hope that they were illuminating in some sense, and I would encourage you to get out and vote for the PPC because really the country is heading in a very dangerous direction. Anybody who recognizes historical patterns and trends can see that, and it is reversible, but it will require us to perhaps have a bit more of a long game, and voting for more of the same, voting for unprincipled people will not get us there. And there are enough of us that if we all band together, we can make a change. We do have power to do that, but we have to stop fighting amongst ourselves, and we have to band together. We have to stand, in this crucial time in our country's history, find the things that unite us and work on those things.
Yep. All right. Thanks again. I think that was a great way to end it. Sam, have a great night. Everyone, please remember to push all the buttons you're supposed to push, as this is the internet. It helps us out. And I will be doing my regular Wednesday night show for TNT Live. This will substitute for TNT Live this week, but the narrative will be running later in the week. So thanks everyone for tuning in, and I will see you later in the week. Good night.